What if I told you that families during the Great Depression created meals so incredible they could feed 6 people for less than £10 today? While you're struggling with rising grocery bills and bland ready meals, Depression-era British families mastered the art of turning the cheapest ingredients into culinary masterpieces. These weren't survival rations or grim wartime food. These were brilliant recipes that transformed pennies' worth of basic ingredients into hearty, satisfying meals that would make your mouth water. Families had no choice but to become cooking geniuses, and their techniques created dishes so good that people still make them today when they want real comfort food that doesn't break the bank. While modern families spend fortunes on processed meals and takeaways, these Depression-era cooks were creating restaurant-quality dinners from ingredients that cost almost nothing. You won't believe the ingenious methods they discovered. At number 15 we have Lancashire hotpot. This is pure genius disguised as simplicity. Mill workers in Manchester worked 12-hour shifts in cotton mills, breathing lint and operating dangerous machinery. They left home before dawn and returned after dark. But they figured out something incredible: how to come home to a meal that tasted like it was prepared by a professional chef. Here's their shocking secret method. Take the cheapest cuts of lamb you can find, neck, shoulder, or even mutton that other people wouldn't touch. Layer it with onions sliced paper thin, then cover everything with potatoes sliced to the exact same thickness. The precision mattered. If the potatoes were uneven, some would burn while others stayed raw. Add just enough stock to create steam, but not so much that it becomes soup. Then comes the crucial part. The top layer of potatoes had to overlap like roof shingles, creating a seal that trapped all the flavors below while forming a golden, crispy crust on top. 8 hours later, while they were breaking their backs in the mills, their dinner was transforming itself. The cheap meat fell apart into tender, succulent shreds. The onions melted into sweet, savory layers that penetrated everything. The bottom potatoes absorbed all the meat juices and became creamy and rich, while the top layer turned into something that looked like expensive restaurant potatoes. One pot fed an entire family for less than you spend on a single coffee today, and every person at that table felt like they were eating something special. Number 14. Scouse from Liverpool. The name comes from lobscouse, a sailor's stew, but Liverpool families turned it into an art form of stretching ingredients. Here's where they got really clever, and this technique will change how you think about cooking forever. Families would use 5 potatoes for every tiny piece of meat, sometimes even more. But the secret wasn't just the ratio, it was the layered cooking technique. They'd start by browning whatever meat scraps they could afford in the bottom of a heavy pot. This wasn't just cooking, it was building flavor foundations. Those brown bits stuck to the bottom contained concentrated meat essence that would later dissolve into the stew. Then came the vegetables in a specific order: onions first, cooked until they started to caramelize and add sweetness. Then carrots, cut into chunks that would hold their shape but soften enough to add natural sugars. Finally, mountains of potatoes, cut into pieces that would partially dissolve and thicken the stew, while others stayed intact for texture. Everything simmered together for hours, until the liquid became so thick and rich with dissolved potato starch that it coated the back of a spoon. The result was a stew that tasted intensely meaty even though it was mostly vegetables. When times got really desperate, they made blind scouse, no meat at all, just vegetables and potatoes cooked with such skill that it still satisfied completely. Families would fight over who got to scrape the bottom of the pot because that's where all the concentrated flavors settled. Number 13. Shepherd's and cottage pie. This wasn't just throwing meat and potatoes together, it was architectural cooking that could feed a crowd from scraps. The technique started with understanding your butcher. Families would ask for mince made from trimmings and offcuts that other customers rejected. This meat was cheap because it looked ugly, but it had more flavor than expensive cuts because it came from different parts of the animal. They'd cook this mince slowly with diced onions, carrots, and whatever vegetables needed using up. The key was building layers of flavor. First, browning the meat until it developed a deep crust, then adding vegetables to cook in the rendered fat, then stirring in a bit of flour to thicken everything into a rich gravy. The magic happened with the potato topping. They'd boil potatoes until they were completely tender, then mash them with butter and milk until they were fluffy clouds of comfort. But here's the technique that made the difference. They'd spread the potatoes thick over the meat mixture, then use a fork to create ridges and peaks across the surface. These ridges would catch the heat in the oven and turn golden brown, creating a landscape of crispy peaks and creamy valleys. The potatoes weren't just a lid, they were the main event, sealing in all the flavors below while creating a beautiful, golden surface that made the dish look like something from a fancy restaurant. One small portion of meat could feed 8 people this way, and everyone left the table completely satisfied. Number 12, toad in the hole. This dish proves that Depression-era cooks understood food science before anyone called it that. The name sounds silly, but the technique is brilliant. Take the cheapest, most questionable sausages you can find, the kind made from scraps, fillers, and mystery meat that cost almost nothing. But here's where the genius begins. Place these sad sausages in a heavy iron pan and put them in a hot oven until they start to sizzle and release their fat. This step is crucial because that fat becomes the foundation for everything that follows. While the sausages are heating, make a batter from flour, eggs, and milk, the exact same proportions as Yorkshire pudding. When the sausages were properly browned and the fat was smoking hot, you'd pour the batter directly into the pan around them. The sizzling fat would immediately start cooking the bottom of the batter, while the heat from above made it puff up like a balloon. As it baked, the batter would climb up the sides of the pan and puff around the sausages like edible clouds. What started as 1 or 2 pathetic sausages became a feast that could easily feed 4 people. The contrast of textures, crispy batter, soft interior, and savory sausages made every bite interesting. Children would actually get excited about this meal because it looked impressive and tasted rich, even though it cost almost nothing to make. Number 11, bangers and mash with onion gravy. Don't let the simple name fool you. This was precision engineering disguised as comfort food. The bangers got their name because cheap wartime sausages were so full of water and fillers that they would literally explode in the pan if you cooked them too quickly. You'd pierce them all over with a fork to prevent bursting. Then fry them slowly in a heavy pan until their casings split and crackled, revealing the juicy interior. The slow cooking rendered out all the fat, which you'd save for the next step. Meanwhile, potatoes were boiled until they fell apart, when pierced with a fork, then mashed with butter, milk, and the rendered sausage fat, until they became creamy mountains that could stand up on a fork. Then came the onion gravy, which transformed the whole meal from simple to sublime. Onions were sliced thin and cooked slowly in the sausage fat until they turned golden brown and sweet. A sprinkle of flour helped thicken the mixture, then stock was added gradually while stirring to prevent lumps. When you assembled the plate, dried, creamy mashed potatoes forming a bed, crispy sausages nestled on top, and golden gravy cascading over everything, it looked and tasted like something from an expensive pub. Families could stretch 2 sausages into a meal for 4 people, just by increasing the potatoes and gravy. Number 10. Bubble and squeak. Monday morning alchemy that turned weekend leftovers into weekday magic. Every British family had the same problem: what to do with the leftover vegetables from Sunday's roast dinner. Throwing away food wasn't an option when money was tight, but nobody wanted to eat cold, sad vegetables. So, they invented this technique that transformed yesterday's boring sides into today's exciting main course. Take your leftover mashed potatoes, usually cold and congealed by Monday morning, and combine them with leftover cabbage, Brussels sprouts, carrots, or whatever vegetables remained from Sunday. The mixture got its name from the sounds it made while cooking. It would literally bubble and squeak as the moisture escaped and the edges started to caramelize. You'd heat a heavy skillet with a generous amount of fat, then spread the vegetable-potato mixture evenly across the pan and resist the urge to stir it. The bottom needed time to form a golden, crispy crust while the top stayed soft and creamy. After several minutes, you'd flip portions of it over to brown the other side, creating a patchwork of crispy and soft textures. What started as boring leftover vegetables became a dish with complex flavors. The caramelized edges tasted nutty and rich, while the soft interior provided comfort and substance. Children who had refused to eat their vegetables on Sunday would eagerly devour them in this transformed state. Number 9. Liver and onions with bacon. This was nutritional warfare disguised as comfort food. Liver cost almost nothing because most people didn't understand how to cook it properly. They'd throw it in a hot pan and end up with something that tasted like leather soaked in metal. But Depression-era families figured out the secrets that turned this cheap ingredient into something their children actually fought over. The technique started with preparation. Thin slices of beef or lamb liver would be soaked in milk for at least 30 minutes. This wasn't just an old wives' tale. The milk actually drew out the compounds that made liver taste metallic and strong. The cooking order was crucial. Bacon first, rendered slowly until crispy. Then came the onions, cooked slowly in the bacon fat until they turned golden brown and sweet. This could take 20 minutes or more. The liver slices were patted dry and dredged in seasoned flour before being quickly fried in the hot bacon fat. The final dish was assembled like a work of art. Creamy mashed potatoes forming a foundation, tender liver slices arranged on top, sweet caramelized onions cascading over everything, and crispy bacon crumbled across the surface. The result had more iron and vitamins than any expensive steak, plus it was so flavorful that even picky children would clean their plates. Number 8. Steak and kidney pie. This dish required both courage and wisdom. Courage to buy ingredients that squeamish people avoided, and wisdom to know that those ingredients would create something extraordinary. The steak wasn't prime beef. It was usually chuck, shin, or other tough cuts. The kidneys were often given away free by butchers because most customers wouldn't touch them. But experienced cooks knew that kidneys weren't just cheap filler. They were flavor bombs that would make the whole pie taste incredibly rich and meaty. The kidneys had to be trimmed of all fat and gristle, then cut into small pieces and soaked in salted water to remove any strong flavors. The floured meat was browned in batches in a heavy pot, building up layers of caramelized flavors. Everything simmered slowly for hours until the tough beef became fork tender and the kidneys had released their rich, savory flavor throughout the gravy. When it emerged from the oven, the pastry was golden and flaky, and cutting into it released a cloud of aromatic steam. Inside, the filling was dark, rich, and intensely savory. The kidneys had transformed the simple beef stew into something that tasted like it contained much more expensive meat. Number 7. Cornish pasty. These weren't just hand pies, they were engineering marvels designed to solve specific problems faced by working people. Miners needed food they could eat underground with dirty hands, in dark, dangerous conditions where they couldn't wash up or sit down for a proper meal. The pastry had to be sturdy enough to survive being carried in a lunch pail and tough enough to work as a handle, but still tender enough to be edible. The crimped borders weren't just decoration, they were handles that miners could grip with dirty hands, eating toward the crimp and throwing away the part they'd touched. Inside was a carefully calculated mixture of ingredients that would cook perfectly in the sealed pastry environment. Diced potatoes formed the base, onions added sweetness and moisture, and a small amount of beef provided protein and flavor. The key was the proportions, as mostly potatoes and vegetables, with just enough beef to add richness. As the pasty baked, the ingredients steamed together in their pastry pouch, creating their own gravy from the meat juices and vegetable moisture. One pasty contained a complete meal that would keep a grown man satisfied through an entire underground shift. Number 6. Suet dumpling stew. This was the ultimate stretching technique, capable of turning the thinnest broth into a filling, substantial meal. Suet, the hard fat from around beef kidneys, was incredibly cheap because most people didn't know what to do with it. The technique started with making the lightest possible dumpling dough. Suet was grated fine and mixed with flour, baking powder, and just enough cold water to form a soft dough. The mixture had to be handled gently. Overworking would make the dumplings tough. The magic happened when spoonfuls of the dumpling mixture were dropped into simmering liquid. The dumplings would immediately begin to swell, absorbing the liquid and flavors around them. As they cooked, they released starch that thickened the broth, while the suet rendered out to add richness. What started as a pot of thin soup became a thick, hearty stew filled with fluffy dumplings that had absorbed all the available flavors. Children loved fishing for dumplings in their bowls, and the dish was so filling that even grown men felt satisfied after eating it. Number 5. Welsh caul or potato and leek soup. Welsh families elevated this simple combination into an art form that could sustain families through the hardest times. Potatoes were the cheapest, most filling food available. Leeks were often the only fresh vegetables affordable in winter. The genius was in understanding how to make these humble ingredients taste complex and satisfying. Waxy potatoes would hold their shape and provide texture, while floury varieties would break down and thicken the soup naturally. Most cooks used a combination. Leeks were cooked slowly until they softened and sweetened. This could take 20 minutes or more, but it concentrated their mild onion flavor. Then came the potatoes, added with water or thin stock to cover. The soup simmered gently until some potatoes dissolved completely while others remained in chunks. Some cooks would mash a few potatoes against the side of the pot during cooking to release their starch and thicken the soup naturally. The finished soup provided complete nutrition and lasting satisfaction from ingredients that cost almost nothing. Number 4. Fish and chips with mushy peas. This wasn't just pub food. It was a complete nutritional strategy that kept working-class families healthy when fresh meat became too expensive. Fish was often cheaper than meat, especially for families living near ports or with access to day-old fish from markets. The fish was coated in a batter made from flour, water, or milk, and sometimes a bit of beer. The batter protected the delicate fish from the hot oil, created a crispy contrast to the soft interior, and added bulk to make the fish more filling. The chips were cut thick from large potatoes, creating substantial pieces that would be crispy outside and fluffy inside. Mushy peas were made from marrowfat peas, dried peas that were soaked overnight, then cooked slowly until they broke down into a thick, creamy mass. The combination gave you complete nutrition: protein from the fish, carbohydrates from the potatoes, and vitamins from the peas. It was quick to prepare, filling enough to satisfy hard-working adults, and cheaper than most meat-based meals. Number 3. Peas pudding and ham hock. Split peas were one of the most economical sources of protein available. Dried, they lasted almost forever and cost virtually nothing. A ham hock was added not primarily for its meat, but for the rich, smoky flavor it would release as it simmered. Over several hours, the peas would gradually break down and thicken into a creamy, porridge-like consistency. The ham hock would become tender enough to shred with a fork, and its collagen would dissolve into the cooking liquid, creating natural richness and body. The finished dish was thick enough to slice when cold, but served hot and creamy straight from the pot. It was incredibly filling. The split peas provided plant-based protein and fiber that kept people satisfied for hours. A small amount of meat flavored a large quantity of peas, making it an economical way to feed a family. Number 2. Vegetable stew with bread. When times were truly desperate and even cheap meat became unaffordable, families had to create satisfying meals from vegetables alone. This required both creativity and a deep understanding of how to build complex flavors from simple ingredients. The foundation was always potatoes, cheap, filling, and capable of providing the starch that would make people feel full. The technique began with building a flavor base. Onions were cooked slowly until they caramelized and developed sweetness. Carrots added natural sugars and bright color. Turnips, parsnips, and swedes provided different textures and flavors. Some families would save vegetable peelings and scraps throughout the week, then use them to make a rich vegetable stock that formed the base of the stew. Others would brown vegetables in a bit of fat before adding liquid, creating caramelized flavors that made the stew taste richer and more complex. Stale bread played a crucial role in making these vegetable stews more satisfying. Day-old bread could be bought cheaply from bakers, then cubed and stirred into the stew where it would absorb the flavorful broth and swell up, adding substance and making the meal more filling. Number 1. Kedgeree. Coastal families developed this ingenious dish that could create satisfying meals from ingredients that kept well and cost little. The dish combined flaked smoked fish, often fin and haddy that was cheaper than fresh fish, with rice or potatoes and hard-boiled eggs. The technique was more sophisticated than it appeared. The fish had to be poached gently in milk or water to remove excess salt and flake properly without becoming tough. Rice was cooked separately until just tender, then combined with the flaked fish and chopped hard-boiled eggs. The mixture was seasoned with curry powder if available, or simply with pepper and herbs. The dish was then reheated gently, often with a bit of butter or cream if the family could afford it, until everything was hot and the flavors had melded together. Both versions proved that with creativity and technique, preserved fish could become the foundation of meals that felt complete and satisfying. They provided complete nutrition: protein from fish and eggs, carbohydrates from rice or potatoes, and various vitamins and minerals. The secret they all knew. Right now, the average British household spends between £1,500 and £2,000 every month just on ready meals and takeaways. That's up to £24,000 a year, more than many people's entire salary just to avoid cooking. Meanwhile, we're eating processed foods loaded with preservatives, paying premium prices for tiny portions, and wondering why our weekly shop keeps climbing past £100. Take Lancashire hotpot. What sounds like a basic northern dish is actually pure genius. Using £10.60 worth of cheap lamb shoulder, potatoes and onions, you create 6 servings. That's not just savings, that's 55% less money for better food. Or consider scouse from Liverpool. 1 pound of cheap beef mince, 5 pounds of potatoes, some carrots, feeds 8 people. We're talking about 75% savings on every single meal. When you add it all up, a British family of 4 can realistically save between £9,000 and £16,000 every year by learning these techniques. That's not theoretical, that's using actual prices from British supermarkets today. A single person saves £2,200 to £4,000 annually. That's a proper holiday, your car insurance and mott sorted, or a decent chunk toward a house deposit, just from understanding what people in Birmingham, Liverpool, and Manchester figured out when every shilling mattered. These recipes aren't just about saving money. They're about reclaiming skills that made British cooking legendary, eating food that actually nourishes you, and proving that the best meals don't come from a packet. If this video has helped you in any way, please like and subscribe to my channel.